I was the first person in my family to return since we were kicked out in 1967. So it was a very monumental experience for me and for my family. I haven't had time to fully process this experience yet, but I have started writing about it. So I do want to read a little bit about my family's story. This is incomplete, so I'll try to just fill in. But so I recently visited my family's abandoned village in Palestine, something my grandparents spent decades dreaming of, but never got a chance to experience after being forced out. Yado is an ancient Canaanite village in the Ramla district, referred to by the Canaanites as Yalun, meaning tile. A now abandoned piece of land that was once lush, fertile farmland filled with hundreds of grapevines, cacti, pomegranate, olive, almond, and fig trees. By the mid-1950s, Zionists began terrorizing the people of Yado and forcing them out. Yitzhak Rabin, a Nobel Prize winner, ordered soldiers to flood the village on armored jeeps and begin depopulating the village. On December 2nd, 1954, the Israeli army murdered 3 boys in Yado, all under the age of 12, who were simply gathering firewood. In the months following, the army increased aggressions, causing many people in the village to flee to nearby villages or to Amman, Jordan. Soldiers were shooting over people's heads to terrify them and expedite the ethnic cleansing process, a tactic that has been used all throughout the ongoing Nakba. They dropped a bomb on the village, which paralyzed my great-grandfather from the waist down. Prior to the occupation and the Nakba, they lived very well off their vast farm that spanned acres. The land gave them livelihood, and in return, they dedicated their lives to it. But with my great-grandpa paralyzed, his children being too young and inexperienced to run the farm alone, and the Israeli army encroaching on the village, they felt they had no choice but to flee to Jerusalem with nothing but the clothes on their backs. At the age of 16, my grandpa, Sidi Abu Mahed, known as just Ahmed at the time, fled to Amman on foot in search of financial opportunities. He walked barefoot to Amman, a harrowing journey of nearly 80 miles. In Amman, the only work a farmer boy with no more than a 5th grade education could find was with a shoe repairman, who promised him a pair of shoes in exchange for a few days' work. Sido worked tirelessly, eyeing the pair of combat boots that once belonged to a Jordanian soldier, but would soon be his. Wearing the heavy combat boots that were far too big, he walked all the way back to Jerusalem to unite with his family. Something about wearing combat boots gave him a sense of pride, like he was marching back as a soldier himself, ready to fight for his land back. Just 2 years later, his father passed away, leaving him with the heavy responsibility of caring for his younger siblings, leaving him with big shoes to fill once again. On June 7, 1967, Zionists forced every person out of Yado and bulldozed and dynamited the village, destroying the hundreds of homes that existed for centuries before that. When soldiers first arrived, villagers met them with white flags. They only wanted peace. There was no resistance activities in Yado. The villagers were humble farmers trying to live a simple life. On loudspeakers, Israelis told the people of Yado that if they remained, they'd have no one to blame but themselves for their deaths. Their only 2 options were to leave or die. People fled believing they'd one day be able to return when tensions settled. My paternal grandparents were living between Yado and Amman at the time because my grandpa found work in Amman, but his parents remained on their farm in Yado. When the Zionists came, my father, only 3 years old, was in Yado with his mom, newborn baby sister, and grandparents. During the Nakba, they fled to Wahdat refugee camp in Amman, where food and formula would soon become scarce. My grandma was no longer able to produce enough milk to breastfeed her baby girl. Soon after, the aunt I never had a chance to meet would starve to death in my grandma's arms. My father was barely old enough to form memories at the time, but he says the images of watching his baby sister starve will haunt him forever. My grandma would go on to have 11 more children, which I believe was both a trauma response and an act of resistance against the people who tried to erase her and her bloodline. At least a dozen villagers tried returning to the village after its occupation, and they are still unaccounted for today. Yado remains uninhabited. The occupiers never intended to settle on or cherish this beautiful land. They simply wanted to ethnically cleanse it and assert their power over the native population. After completely obliterating the village, they built the Canadian Recreational Park in its place, also called Valley of the Springs, because Yado once had many water springs. Every structure in the village was destroyed except one, a water reservoir that has since been drained. Few crops remain. There were some cacti, some sidra trees, which I was able to pick some sidra off of, and I also gathered some soil, which ended up being the most valuable gift that I gave my grandma and my father. That's all that I have written, but going back was an act of resistance in and of itself. It is a threat to the Zionist occupation for us to still have this connection to the land, despite me never having seen it for these past 2 months. So like I said, that in and of itself is an act of resistance, and one day, inshallah, we will be able to return for good and permanently.